and, the city's ordinances. And the draft ordinance is compliant with the limitations set forth by state law on what we can do. And right now, a temporary moratorium, as planning director said, is in place regarding the establishment of healing centers and businesses in the city till 5/27. So we're timely here being before you all, but we've got to move it along, and we should be able to proceed to council for first and second reading in April in advance of the expiration of the moratorium. So really proud of the way that the city has been really kind of moving through this and moving it so far. And if we need additional help, the planning department prepared the zoning map before you all based on the direction and what the ordinance says so far. So however y'all want to proceed from here, ask questions, move anything.
I'd like to add some clarification around the maps. You had a map in your packet that was done initially just based on the placement of healing centers. So it highlighted those particular zone districts associated with that, but it did not include the heavy industrial light commercial zone district. And now that Betsy brought to my attention, given that that's spelled out as a separate line item that would appear in our use matrix for natural healing, natural medicine businesses, and that is the zone district where that's potentially permitted. We updated a map for you. So this evening, that's what you have on the table in front of you. There's a larger one on the table there in the front of the room. So the folks in the audience, you're welcome to come up and take a look at that. In terms of where that zone district is. And actually, I can share my screen real quick. So this particular map is the updated version. And so what we did, and it was Dave in the back there in the IT booth who put this together for us, consistent with the Department of Regulatory Agencies rulemaking that they had done. They were setting up a radius of 1,000 feet away from schools, daycares,
In residential child care facilities. So
commercial.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we identified all of those that we were aware of here in the city of Woodland Park and drew that radius around there. And then underneath that, in the shades of pink and purple and red, at the far northwest corner and the far southeast corner of this map, that's where that heavy service light industrial zone district is. So there are places where these districts overlap, or the 1,000-foot radius overlaps into those zone districts, but there are also areas where they're not impacted by existing business or childcare in schools. So those are the areas where you would see the potential for these businesses to be located. With regard to the zone districts that were selected, that was done by looking at the existing use matrix. And within that, there is a category for, health clinics. I'm trying to remember what the exact verbiage is. My screen is somewhat limited here in terms of what I can see. Sorry about that. I thought I had it queued up here. Health services, there it is. Health service clinics, including pharmacy as an accessory use. So that's currently a permitted use in that neighborhood commercial, community commercial, service commercial, and central business district zone. It's permitted conditionally within the PUD zone. So that's the category that we were looking at that we thought was most similar to the healing center. And that's why that's what's proposed on that map. And then Betsy is the one who brought forward the location for the natural medicine businesses in that heavy service light industrial zone district. So.
And when you look at the table, the section 3 in the draft ordinance, We actually recommend at this time that we separate natural medicine businesses into their own subsection W and separate into natural medicine healing centers, and then actually natural medicine businesses other than healing centers, since the purpose of the healing center is essentially to provide more of a medicinal type service. And the businesses are, growing, testing, cultivation, all of those things. So that's why it's there. And we understand right now, there's no, intention that I'm aware of to permit recreational marijuana or anything in this city. But say in the future it happens, great. Now we have a category where it's these certain substances, let's put them together in a new area of the chart. So a zoning table, I guess, is perhaps the correct way to say there, but that's why that recommendation was made that way.
Betsy, in the draft ordinance, could you highlight for us where, because it pretty much reads like the state code. Could
Yep.
you highlight for us where it's different, where either it deviates or maybe goes adds additional criteria or points that would not be found in the state code?
In the state code. So the state code is really voluminous. I mean, it's 2 different sections. So what these do is it just pulls out what the city can do, which is just time, manner, place regulations. And so comparing where it deviates is probably pretty difficult. It follows what the state code allows, and then, or it's Colorado Revised Statutes.
Well, let me maybe ask the question slightly different.
Sure.
Where in it, if at all, does this ordinance add local governance to the time, place, and manner?
Oh, yeah. Okay, great. So let's see. So the definitions follow the Regulatory Act. The state one, the permitted locations, that lets the local government determine, the place, the time, manner, place, the place part of that, correct? So that's locally, where do we want that to occur? That's for natural medicine healing centers and the businesses. Distance from schools, we followed our council recommended following the state distances, and a lot of municipalities are doing that. That's very, very common. I've been monitoring this in different areas across the state. Hours of operation, we put that on there for the city. Public view, lighting, all that pretty much follows, I believe. Yeah, and then we put our local nuisance in there, just since this is kind of a newly enacted area of law. That's why we put it in this part. So yeah, that's probably pretty much the main part of that.
Yeah, that helps. Thanks.
Of course.
I hope most of us got a chance to look at the tape of the previous work session by the city council. I found that very, very helpful in identifying sort of questions of how this would apply. And there was some input from people knowledgeable about the area and that. Let me ask, are there questions people have of this? Should we go line by line through it, or let people everyone one after another identify issues or concerns?
I would suggest going line by line. I think I got some comments and.
I've got some questions as well, but we can do that as we go through the
Yes.
document.
Okay, then it's open to the ordinance. Where at the recitals, questions, concerns? Section 1 starts at the bottom of page 2. Section 2 is primarily has actually that's the bulk of it. Has definitions.
I would suggest that prior to definitions, we add another section to the ordinance entitled Purpose and Intent to tell people in the future in our code what we're trying to accomplish with this regulation.
Sure. So yeah, we usually do that in the whereas clause, but I can summarize that and make it succinct so that there's a clear purpose and intent. Absolutely.
Okay.
And Larry, I take it you want that to flow into the code revision?
Yes.
So I could just change that and make the purpose and intent. I will change that, make that 18.80.010, and then I'll just fix the numbering throughout as we go along. Is that what you all had in mind?
Right before definitions.
Yes.
Yeah, just so, yeah, you're pretty consistent with that point, you know, we do the revised code, so
You know, and
you
Betsy.
wanted to make sure it made it into the code.
Yes.
Betsy and I just talked about that prior to the meeting, recognizing that what you have in front of you is structured so it fits in the current regulations, the current structure of our zoning regulations. And since we are going through that wholesale update, it will be renumbered,
Mhm.
but it will be carried forward into that updated regulation.
So while, yeah, like Karen was saying, it might be, you know, that now it might be 18.80.010, in the future may be different, but it's still gonna be the same exact order if it were A through B, right?
Before we leave the definitions, I have comment, could either apply your definitions or apply in the later section. The definitions apply by its words. It's chapter 18.80.
Yes.
Actually, the definitions are used in the use table 18.09.090, which is not chapter 18, which is not chapter 18.80. So
Okay.
I think we either want to say the definitions apply to this chapter and section 18.06.09W,
Okay.
or in a reference in the use table, we want to say the definitions, you know, these terms are defined in 18.80, chapter 18.80. We'll go either place, but the terms certainly are self-defining. People have preference where to put it. Then assuming you concur with the idea, observation.
I would suggest, I like that's a very good idea, good catch, Lee. That I think the definitions for the land uses, the natural medicine healing center, the businesses should be defined generally in the code, because like Lee said, it's referenced, you know, in the use table.
Okay.
And then the rest of those can be just part of this chapter. It's more of a it's a description, but it only really applies to this section of this chapter.
And so just to clarify, you want me to remove part of these definitions and put them somewhere else?
I think they can be included all here except for the use definition. The centers and the business, those needs to be defined overall definitions of the code. Because like Lee said, they show up in our use table.
Yeah,
So they need to
it's
go
the
on both
The
places,
easier way to do it, if we're gonna, assuming we're gonna do it in chapter 1880, is just to say, for purposes of this chapter and section 18.09.09
Okay.
90W.
Can Betsy and I work on the numbering and the location?
Okay.
Because a lot of most of our definitions are actually in 18.06. So I'd like to confer with Betsy in terms of what we bring back to you for adoption. We'll work on the numbering. But for conversation tonight, are you comfortable with what's actually in the verbiage of the definitions?
Regulatory act probably should be specific to this act, whatever the name of this regulatory act is.
So the Regulatory Act describes the excuse me, the Colorado Natural Medicine Code. And so the reason why it's referred as Regulatory Act is actually that's what's consistently used in municipalities throughout the state. And so part of in trying to make some of these definitions not only mirror the state definitions, that's obviously for ease, applicability, and interpretation, but it's also that the state licensing agencies, when they issue licenses to applicants, they actually check local ordinances to make sure that the license application, everything is matching what's there locally. So this is to make sure it kind of flows well and it's, you know.
Yeah,
mirroring
I was
everything.
gonna, just the term regulatory act could mean something different in this section than it might somewhere in some other section of the code, and
Okay,
small opportunity for confusion.
sure.
And
Like-
I was checking to see if, regulatory act is also in our definitions. I don't know if it is or not.
Yeah, it's in the whereas clauses. And let's see, it is
No,
in
I
the
meant like
definitions
in
as
the-
well.
in the
Sorry.
overall
And
code
some oth-
definition.
Some other ordinance, some other portion of the code somewhere said something about a regulatory act.
I understand. So I can change it to say Natural Medicine Regulatory Act. Let's do that.
Exactly
Perfect.
where I was-
Understand what you're saying.
Would it be helpful
you.
just to go ahead and cite the CRS citation?
So we could all think about that part just because, you know, as laws change and everything in the future, I don't want to get us in a scenario where I'm saying CRS within our actual code, and then it changes in the future, and then we're having to go back in. But defining it by the title of the CRS provision, in my opinion, is a really good way to keep consistency and avoid confusion in the future.
Okay.
1880.20.
At the last part of the section, it says PD, Planned Development District. We don't have a planned development district, but we have a planned unit development.
Oh, I apologize for that. I'm so sorry. Thank you for pointing that out. PUD, Planned Unit Development District. That was inadvertent on my part.
You're gonna need to do a search and replace on that, because there's another one in the next section.
Yep, absolutely. Thank
And I'm
you.
not trying to replow old ground, but might be worth just understanding why the central business district was excluded, because that seems to be a place where businesses tend to be put.
I would have to look back at my notes on why that one was, and it may have been,
The preference by council.
I think it was, yeah, it had to have been a preference by council, and I'm sorry off the top of my head. I don't recall why that one was not included, but I think the main thing was I'm sorry, I don't recall the answer to that.
I believe the reason for excluding it would be, since that central business district is our downtown area where you want businesses more along the lines of retail shops, restaurants, that type of vibrant downtown, rather than more personal service or personal care type facility like a healing center. So I believe that was the rationale. I'm sorry, what were you saying, sir?
I said it's probably like dental offices and medical offices. They're not in the central business district either.
Yeah, and thank
No.
you. I apologize.
The market has not driven them there, but our use table currently sets them up as a possibility that they could be located within the CBD.
Like I said, I'm not objecting, but point out, in my mind, a bit of an inconsistency. I assume we get into public debate, and that can come out.
Sure.
You mean public comment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Paragraph 30.
Again, there's
Planned unit
PD and PUD.
I fixed that. I'm so sorry, you all. I really went through this several times, and unfortunately that slipped through my fine tooth comb.
Oh, you left that there just for us.
Honestly, I did, because I wanted to kind of,
Wanted to
see if
give
you're
us some-
really on your
Oh,
toes.
it's fruit.
I want to bring, a little zhuzh to the meeting.
See if we're awake, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
Makes feel useful.
I want to make you all feel like the lawyer for once.
So just for awareness, we see what, 3 possible parcels where the light industrial exists and could be utilized.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's 3 different areas where the natural medicine businesses other than a healing center can exist. Yes.
So it's not a lot, but clearly not excluding. Are those already developed?
Karen,
For the most part.
I don't know that answer. I'll need to help me with that one.
Didn't mean they couldn't be repurposed. I know one of them's got equipment storage on it.
All right,
Then
I recognize
building.
that one. I don't know what's on these northern ones.
I'd have to look into that to answer it. I can't answer that on the fly. I'm sorry.
And are you all okay looking into that, Dawn? Thank you.
Just didn't want to be, city be put in a position where it's appearing to practically exclude it,
Understood.
technically allow it, but practically exclude it.
Understand.
Don't prohibit businesses. look at where we can have adult-oriented businesses, it's basically excluded.
But we
It'll
may,
still be similar.
we
get
may
it
have
close.
that authority. In this case, we
Yeah,
explicitly do not have that authority. I haven't studied that one, so I can't.
There's also instances where just because there's a particular use on this parcel at this point in time, doesn't mean that that doesn't change due to ownership, sales of property. So even though at the moment, it might be storage, it doesn't mean at some point, a year or two from now, somebody's coming in and, hey, I've just bought this property. I want to establish this business at this location. So things can change over time.
Yeah, and right now, this is a brand new business that what am I trying to say here? Field, that didn't exist before, so I'm not surprised that, something isn't ready-made for it. It's a new entity, new whole entire industry, quite frankly. So to any extent that comment helps, that's what I was kind of thinking about that.
$40.
Under paragraph B, it states that subsection A does not apply to a licensed facility located on land owned by the city or the state, or apply to a licensed facility. Would it be helpful to just go ahead and say a natural medicine healing center facility, business facility, just to clarify that?
I think I would, if we're going to do that, I should delineate, just say natural medicine healing center or business, just since we separate those out, even though technically, like I said, a healing center is a business, but I'll put both of them.
Okay.
I'll repeat it so it matches. Thank you.
and could you just clarify for me on that paragraph? If the city decided to put one next door, properly separated, it would be allowed and exempt from the distances? Or is it, I'm just not sure what's being
Yes, so
allowed.
understood. So it doesn't.
Is the issue that means the city want to put the center in the maintenance yard or?
No, the city's
Well-
not, no, but it's a typical language, and that we've seen throughout the state, and so we were trying to be uniform on that matter.
So if the city for some reason decided to put it on their property, they'd be exempt from the distances?
Yes.
I
Okay.
don't know. I wonder why the city would have.
Yeah,
Well, I don't imagine the city wanting to, but
I don't
I just
imagine.
want to verify what the point of that paragraph is.
I thought it was pretty odd to call out the
I-
city licensing these facilities on city property. It's okay if the city wants to do it, but city should have to abide by the same distance rules from schools and whatever the other rules there are too, unless the city changes the ordinance.
That would be consistent. I don't know, understand, or I guess it also includes state properties.
Yeah, I can look, so if the general consensus is, if it is legally permissible for me to remove that section, you would like me to do so.
it's a little confusing.
I'm just trying to understand it and I don't
Mhm.
understand.
And that's unfortunately one thing, that's one thing I need to go back up and look a little bit more so I can get back to you on that particular aspect.
I had a question on C. Measuring the distance. I
Yes,
was wondering about the last part, using a route of direct pedestrian access. I guess that means instead of measuring, you should have someone walk with a pedometer and measure how it is. It seems like you'd
So
rather.
they can put a
measure off-
fence up,
Seems like you'd rather measure off a map and say.
go horizontally 1,000 feet
Exactly.
and come back 1,000 feet.
I think
be
the-
50 feet away.
The map looks like it projects 1,000 feet direct line of travel.
Exactly. So to
And
try and
be-
say instead, we should figure out how long, is there a sidewalk that you have to take the corner, you can't go straight? I mean,
so that definition follows exactly how the state mandates that, since the council directed, agreed that let's just follow the state in this area. And so that's where that definition
the
actually
state
came
uses
from.
that wording, okay, but they don't,
Yeah,
I wouldn't think it simplifies
It
things.
follows directly.
And so it's inconsistent with what you're showing on the map.
Well, the map's just showing the maximum there. You might be able to,
Well, is there some clarification? This is give or take on the map? I mean, is the map part of the ordinance?
No, the map is a tool for analyzing what this looks like and where this could possibly go.
So if somebody's close to the edge on the map, you would get out and measure the sidewalks.
Well,
And to
It's
Ken's
not
point,
straight line distance.
it's
as
the
a
using the
profile.
route
It
of a
is
direct pedestrian access
traffic
that's the problem.
distance as they walk to and
So
from.
they gotta
Yes.
walk around that fence and can't cross over the property illegally.
But this is one of the areas that the city is allowed to specify, correct?
Typically, when we do measurement, it would be from a property line and we would go out 1,000 feet and draw, like we did for the map that is in front of you. And that's the tool that's then used in terms of where does a neighboring parcel or prospective parcel for the business to locate, where does that fall relative to that radius?
so it could be 500 feet away, but you have to walk all the way around the block, which is over 1,000 feet.
Right.
And it's good
Right.
to go.
They make.
I understand
it on
that.
the opposite side of the lot, away from the school. And that adds that much, many feet.
Measuring as the horizontal distance is easy to follow. If you're gonna do pedestrian access, it could be a lot closer.
Yeah, sure could.
Could be, I mean, depending on, it could be much closer.
In theory, it could be right next door if there was some
If,
oddity of streets and sidewalks where you could only get there by going around all the long way around.
So from a staff perspective, the poor people that have to implement this,
That's very awkward, yes.
and explain it to somebody else constructively. If this is one of the sections that we can make an amendment to, I think it would serve the city of Woodland Park if this language was more similar to how we measure other things in our code. And I can get you samples of that, Betsy.
That'd be great.
Does that work for the rest of the commission?
I still have a question that it's measuring from the property line of the school to the building
Hmm.
and not to the
property.
adjacent property. I mean, I've
Yeah.
seen it done both ways, either building to building or
Mhm.
property line to property line. And so
It's
it seems a little
It's
inconsistent.
property line to building height, because I read that, had the same question, read it very closely. And I also said, well, gosh, what if they had like an outdoor treatment area, but then somewhere else it says it has to be all indoors. So I guess to the building makes sense in this case, since it's mandated to be indoors.
But is that along the path of travel? So it's not to the back of the building, which is closest to the school. It's as you walk around the sidewalk to the front door.
So I think if we follow kind of how we typically measure, will that help clarify those questions?
I think it will. And
Hmm.
Because if you are the people on the ground doing it.
well, and we typically do it off of a map.
Mhm.
you know.
This definition is difficult to implement.
Yeah, the way that's written, yes.
Sure.
And I said it's our current ADU regs where the city had previously successfully adopted requirements for separation between accessory dwelling units. So that's the one that's coming to mind in terms of where we've got a way to measure that's already passed muster and been adopted. So that's what I would look back to in terms of what we would import here. Using
And
We just struck the using a route of direct pedestrian access. That's a lot clearer.
I'm gonna go back to how we currently have things
Perfect.
worded and
That's fine.
we'll get that consistency.
So is that a recommendation of the?
I mean, that's property line to property.
I think that follows where they suggested we were, is that we'll make the change. That's a simple way to do it, if it's permissible to do so.
Yeah.
Is that the recommendation of the commission?
Yeah,
think we
if our
clarify.
lawyer says it's not permissible to do so, then I guess we really need to leave it in.
Well,
Yes,
I'm not worried
exactly.
about that because, in the
I think consistency.
In
if
the
we
statute, it says the governing body of municipality by ordinance may vary the distance restrictions imposed by this subsection, or may eliminate one or more of the types of schools or facilities. So we clearly have the authority
Mhm.
to change it.
Oh, I expected, we are gonna be able to do it, but our lawyer wants to verify that before agreeing to change it.
And I think that as long as you all are in consensus with this, I think having consistency with the manner in which the people who are on the ground who would
Yeah.
be doing it and how it's written, I have zero problem. In fact, I think that's a great recommendation. Let's put some consistency through it.
One concern is looking at the map. We have the HSC on the north end, and it's partially within the 1,000-foot radius and partially outside.
Mhm.
So we're excluding the entire property from? Or could they actually produce mushrooms on the northern portion of that lot?
Well, they're not gonna produce mushrooms because the mushrooms producing zone is different than the,
No, that's,
He's
that,
talking about the heavy
Yeah,
yeah,
service.
the heavy
Talk
service
about
commercial.
Light commercial.
So it is that particular lot
Yeah.
parcel.
far north one.
And so we'd be eliminating that. And the only one available would then be the southernmost.
Now, as I read, it doesn't eliminate the parcel, but the building in which the business,
Currently, but if we
Reside.
change the definition to be distance to the property
Property line.
line, it would
Oh, I
eliminate that
wasn't-
entirely proper.
I didn't
property.
catch that we wanted to change not only how we measure the distance, but also change it from property line to property line versus property line to building.
So I think what
I think
planning,
keeping the building distance might be more appropriate.
so I think what we can do then, planning and I can do is we'll check if the consistency still complies with not out zoning it or zoning it out of existence. And then if that map checks, then I think we can proceed forward in the way you all would like to make it consistent with the rest of the code. Does that
Yeah.
kind
So-
of summarize what you would like to see?
So I don't know if we need to vote on, it, but just to clarify, I would recommend we make it 1,000 feet, linear distance from school or daycare or whatever,
You
from
just
that
say school.
property line to the building. So
Yes.
keep the consistency with the property line to building with the code, but change the walking distance to a linear distance.
Sure.
That's what I recommend.
I think isn't that the same as where Kennedy just?
Yeah, that's the same as,
Ken
Compass is
Kennedy,
the same as mine, is taking out,
Deleted.
using a route of direct pedestrian access.
exactly, delete the last.
Yeah, it's
words.
simple to make
It's
the
the
change.
same, it's 1,000 feet to the building from the property line.
Yeah, I was just looking at, I could probably almost certainly find an example where there's. Well, maybe not with within the zoning. But with our twisted streets and cul-de-sacs, there might easily be a property that's right next door, but would take 1,000 feet to walk all the way around the block, so.
All right, so we will work on cleaning that up and clarifying what we are measuring to and from and address how that's potentially impacted on the map. So
Yeah.
we'll-
You'll thank us later.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm not arguing with you. I'm just clarifying. You notice that.
Yeah, no, of course, that's totally fine. And I appreciate, them helping with that. So, yeah.
What I'd also suggest is that we want to be very careful that we don't. We have zones within our district that exist today and meet this requirement. So if it's property or building or, direct line, whatever, we need to still provide for it to meet the intent of the Colorado revised statutes.
Yes.
Is there any context as to why the distance exists, what they're trying to achieve? If you understand what you're trying to achieve, it makes it a lot easier to decide what's good and what doesn't make sense.
What the legislative intent was for the 1,000 feet? I think the purpose is just those are areas where children are. And so it's health, safety, welfare are the main ways in which you can legislate. And so I think that's just kind of the typical thought and everything surrounding it.
I believe you see that.
Why it's 1,000 versus 500?
Well, and I'm not sure what the distance is, but I believe you see that with liquor licensing in
Mhm.
terms of a separation.
State standard.
Liquor licenses presumably are equal around schools, so. And they're a lawful business.
Antiquated or not, I think, yeah.
Do we have any other restrictions on other businesses that need special regulations?
I think since this is a,
Like do
well,
churches get involved in this kind of thing? Like
were-
they do for strip clubs and liquor stores?
Churches were not part of what.
The state ordinance.
What Dora put in their own
Right.
making.
I'm aware of that, but we get to add or take, I guess it's just schools in the regulation that you read, right, Don?
Schools and childcare facilities.
Yeah, but it said that we get to pick what buildings or other businesses or just
It
schools?
says we may vary the distance and eliminate one or more of the types of schools or facilities.
Or facility
So we could eliminate one. I don't think we could add one.
use, okay. End of discussion.
thank you.
That's how I read it.
I think this is if I were to make a recommendation, not because I wrote it, but I think that this is really consistent and follows through kind of what the general things are in many
I
municipalities.
mean, any church that has a childcare option or facility or, mom's day out or
Yeah,
something
serving
would
her.
probably qualify as a childcare.
We'd be looking for the licensed childcare center.
Yeah,
Yes, it's licensed, yes.
and they'd have to probably have that if they provide that. Maybe, maybe not.
Mhm.
All right. That's wanted to ask the question.
Thank you.
Moving along to 050.
Yes.
My understanding is that, 8 to 5 is fine. Now, what is 5 o'clock? Is that the last time one of the participants can enter the facility? Or is that when the participant has to leave the facility?
I would say it's if they're allowed to operate, I can work on clarifying that.
I understand the experience can be different lengths of time based on the dosage and the personalities and metabolism of a person. So if somebody who goes in there at 4:45, they might be there for 3 hours.
Mhm.
But they have to leave at 5 and the building has to close at 5.
yeah.
We have to kick them out.
So I would say that'll probably be the last time that an appointment could occur, just the same way as say you had a dentist appointment or a hairdresser appointment, that the building closes at 5, but you start at 45, you're allowed to stay in until you're able to leave. Except,
Is that a clarification we should make in this?
You can, it'd be a good point as well. I think there's a reference to, at least for some level of dosage, 5 hours is a typical time
For a
to
journey.
experience. And we're saying,
So they can't.
do
come in
we
after-
need to say that somebody, a participant has to come in before noon time to get out at 5? What if things are taking a little longer? What do we do? What
Yeah.
happens, what happens then?
During this workshop with the city council, it seemed like some of them could last, fairly long time. So maybe 5 o'clock isn't realistic for somebody that maybe came in at noon. Maybe looking at maybe going 8 to 8 or something, just to give that leadway.
And it said they have to be monitored by the
Right.
staff, so that, to me, that business is in operation while that's occurring. I mean, you got clients and staff
Well,
doing their business.
that's
So,
was suggested there. I think we could
Yeah.
agree. I don't think we need to do a lot of drafting to say what we mean by in use. If there's a participant there, there's a participant there who's having treatment, it's in use.
I would say.
I thought about this too, and I was going to suggest that we change the hours of operation from 7 AM to 8 PM to include 2 typical journeys during a working day.
So a staff member could
Right.
give 2 treatments.
For
Mhm.
staff.
During a-
Yeah,
I don't
They-
think we
they-
want to
they
limit the
interact too.
number
Yeah.
because if you have more than one specialist
Mhm.
monitoring it, I mean, do you have
It
multiple
doesn't limit the
sessions?
number,
Do you
but
have
it
people?
allows the operator of the business to schedule with more flexibility.
yes,
Right.
yes.
So it gives each facilitator the opportunity to have 2
Mhm.
clients a day, but say there's multiple facilitators in a business, a natural healing center. Say
Right.
there's 3, you could have 6 a day, but it's just kind of 2 per person.
Yes.
Is that what you're envisioning or what you're?
Yes. Yes.
I guess
I'm opposed to that.
Yeah, I would frame it, a different way. We're not up to me to decide how many participants can be managed by a facilitator at all. That's.
Oh, no, that's not what we're doing, but I think that's
I
what he was
think
just trying
instead
to.
it really should come back to what is the interest of the city? What is the concern we have in saying that you shouldn't start before 8, or that you have to finish at 5?
What we could say,
Larry suggested 7 AM to 8 PM. Those seem to be reasonable business hours for doctors' offices, similar. The zoning we're talking about, they can start at 7 o'clock.
The only other
Yeah.
restriction we're imposing is distance from childcare or school, which typically close by 4 or 5 in the evening anyway.
Mhm.
But staying open past 5 doesn't seem to increase any exposure.
we could say an administration of, and I need to get the correct terminology, so I apologize, I'm not using the exact one. But administration of a dose must occur between the hours of 7 and 8.
No,
I
no.
don't think we want to tell them how to do.
Hours of use are fine, but we.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, we don't want to tell them how to do their business.
That's
Just
totally fine. I just wasn't sure what
When,
you're saying.
when and when not.
Well, again, when do you go into the building? They have to be out of the building, and if it's a variable time frame for the experience,
Yeah, 'cause
Potentially, even at 5 o'clock, somebody goes in and starts that process, it's a 5-year process, 5-hour process, it's 10 o'clock before they're leaving.
Yeah, but even if they start at noon, it could be a longer period of time just
Yes.
because someone's individual circumstance.
right, and the provider isn't gonna discharge that person to go back out until they're safe to go out. I mean,
Okay, so what are we trying to avoid?
Mhm.
Overnight stays in the building? Is that what we're
Well, it
trying to
just seems-
avoid?
For this particular business, 8 hours is a.
Well, I'm
pretty-
trying to get it a different way,
restrictive.
which is why I'm asking, what are we trying to avoid? What is it we don't want to have happen?
Well, okay.
Overnight stays?
No, I'm just thinking
We
about
don't wanna-
either.
We don't want them to force to be closed.
right.
While the person's still experiencing some disability or altered mind.
And then we're
So-
arguing about whether they're technically open or technically closed, and
Yeah,
it just seems like an 8 hour block of time is somewhat restrictive for this business.
so you're proposing a longer time, which I don't object to, but I'm just still trying to see what that time is.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, that-
And I, like, it's gonna be hard to say, because it's gonna vary on the person and what's going on.
Right.
and-
So I would think that we have a restriction on when I don't know, we can regulate when the first dose is or when the last participant enters the building. And then, because there's gonna be a variable time frame after that.
Is this perhaps an area where we don't know enough to set hours of operation? I hate to have a situation where somebody, if the owner of the business is at 5 o'clock or 6 or 7, or whatever we set it at, and somebody isn't really ready to leave.
Yeah, so we don't wanna have to shut the door.
Right,
Right.
right.
So rather than hours of business, I think we need to regulate the time for administration of the product.
Hmm.
Yeah, but that,
No last call at a bar, 2 o'clock, and if you're still drunk, I guess they kick you
Yeah,
out, but.
But the law doesn't regulate when last call is, the law regulates when they have to kick you out. Then the bar has to back up when
True.
last call needs to be. So I think it's actually kind of a fitting analogy, you have to be closed by, let's say 7 p.m. Well, then you gotta back up and figure out when's the latest time you can administer that treatment.
And then
That's on them to figure out,
Well,
not us.
Okay.
maybe leave it somewhere is, take Larry's suggestion of 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. and then there's some flexibility, the operator can.
Do we have
We'll
other
figure it out.
businesses with hours, restricted hours, and if they do, it's probably for noise, but probably for a different reason.
Mm.
I would say besides bars.
I'm not that familiar with those. Other places I've worked, when marijuana was fresh on the scene, that it's very common to include time limitations with when a marijuana business is open, whether it's medicinal or recreational.
It's the same with the liquor store too.
Yeah.
Well, that's for sale of
Yeah,
product, that's
yeah.
for the experiencing it.
Those are very different because that's when you're gonna buy it and take it home or wherever.
But the point is, you still have limited hours for when you can acquire that product from the business. So,
And
there-
it's within your purview to expand the hours, like you said, if you
So
want.
I don't remember seeing the hours in the state.
I don't recall that off the top of my head either from the state statute. I apologize. I don't recall what this, I don't even know if that state does particularly limit because it would be a local regulation. It's time, manner, place
Cripple
with it.
Creek, they might wanna do it all night because the casinos are open.
But if you all think that 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. sounds good, and if I can brainstorm a way maybe to, kind of solve some of the problems
Yeah.
we're saying here, I can work on that.
But I agree with Don, it's probably the responsibility of the purveyor
Sure.
of
Yep.
when they have to cut off so they can get people out in time.
Yeah.
So
And-
I would agree with the extended time.
Great.
And the big thing is with whatever concerns we have with, like I said, these facilities not being too close to a school or daycare. I don't see that as a problem after 5 o'clock.
not.
So what I've heard is great debate, great discussion. So I think it helps get everybody to a place where they're comfortable. But basically, the language that's here is what we're comfortable with, but
Mhm.
modifying the hours to 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. That's the consensus I'm hearing from you all.
Yes.
Yep, before we
Yes.
go there, I got a couple of changes that I think it would help with some of the issues we're talking about. On the second line, it says services shall only operate. I would suggest remove the word only. So it says services shall operate between the out.
If you
The-
take only out, it means they can operate between the designated ones and others probably.
Mhm,
So if you take out only, it means it's unlimited.
it does.
Where are you looking at,
So op-
Larry? I'm sorry.
Right there.
On the bottom, okay.
If you can, says shall operate between 7 and 8. Only operate between 7 and 8 means you can only operate 7 PM to 8 AM. If
Oh,
it says
I
you
see.
can operate, it creates an inference, but it's certainly doesn't explicitly state you can't operate at other hours. It says you may operate at these hours.
Okay, that's a good point.
I would keep on.
Never mind. How about if we, and you're gonna probably say the same thing, Lee,
Well, I would,
only operate between the normal hours.
I think shall only, if I may put some input in, I think if it were, you know, a let's just think of it, analogy, liquor store. If it says a liquor store shall only operate from 8 AM to 5 PM, we know that the liquor store turns the lights on at 8, turn them off at 5. And you can't operate outside of that. So I think that's why the word only makes sense there. It just says if we're saying a natural medicine healing center goes from 7 AM to 8 PM, lights on, lights off.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
How about Saturdays for the people that work Monday through Friday?
That's within your purview. If there's general consensus to extend it, you can do that.
I was gonna say, I really don't have a problem with them operating 7 days a week if that's what the provider would
that's what's
like to
needed.
do. Because there are those people that can't get to something like this on a weekday or whatever due to other obligations.
I know this may be just adding other information, but I looked up some of the centers that are open.
Mhm.
And this one is 7 to 7 and one is 5:30. I'm sorry, 9 to 5:30.
Mhm.
So
And they're open Saturday. This one particular.
that particular one's open 6 days a week, 7 to 7. So there's, but there was one that was said 9 to 5:30.
Is
So-
is there a view among people among weekend hours, Saturday, Sunday, both?
So my understanding there other municipalities have included weekends. I simply put that in there because it's just a very common business hour and I wanted to let,
I was asking for,
You are.
there's people have a consensus for it. Yeah.
oh,
I think
Weekend hours.
Weekend hours.
Yeah, I'm,
I think adding weekend hours would be appropriate because you go to a doctor on a Saturday
Yeah.
from time to time.
Dog,
And I
weekend
don't think we
hours.
need,
Other, Kennedy,
I'm fine
weekend
with,
hours?
I think Saturday would be a prime time for a business like this.
Sounds like most for the weekend, also delete Monday through Friday.
great. So we want to just do any day of the week, just the time. Perfect.
Yes.
The
Yeah, but-
7 days.
Small statistical sample I did of 3. One was opened on Saturday, the other 2 were closed Saturday and Sunday. One's 8 to 5, one's 9 to 5, yeah. They can do business like they want to, but doesn't seem like restricting Saturdays would, I mean, there are people who work all different times and they gotta, if they need this service, Saturday would seem so to make sense for somebody.
Or come after work.
Great. So I'll
Yeah.
strike the Monday through Friday and extend the hours from 7 A to 8 P.
See you. CDL.
Moving along, 060.
No,
No,
no.
24.
we're still at 060. Yeah.
Yeah.
060.
Something.
No, you're right.
I do have a concern on 60. And it says shall occur out indoors. Now, if you had an enclosed courtyard, which was open to the sky, could you not have it screened from the public and still experience in an outdoor situation
Yeah.
without?
I was thinking the same thing because they brought that up during the previous work
Yes.
session about going outside. I'm going, an enclosed courtyard would solve that problem.
the way this is written was at the request of city council.
Right. And I don't think they were thinking enclosed courtyard inside of a building where they're contained.
Allow in outside areas when it's screened.
Is, yes, then the suggestion would be something along the lines of adding at the second to last sentence. All activities of natural medicine businesses and natural medicine services shall occur indoors or in an enclosed courtyard. Is that what we're suggesting? Then get some
That's the
reaction.
direction I'm headed.
Yeah, that's where I'm kind of
But
thinking.
the courtyard, does that mean it's enclosed by buildings on 4 sides or does a fenced area? account is that?
So if the intent is for you all to allow an outdoor experience as well as an indoor experience, so long as the outdoor experience complies essentially with these other criteria, I can work on the verbiage if that's what you would like me to do.
Yeah.
That's general
That's
consensus.
My preference.
Basically, out of view and the in and out of that has to be strictly controlled. Someone can't just wander in or wander out. So I don't know,
I
I
remember our,
legally way to say that, but I think you're tracking what I'm
Mhm.
looking at.
Yep, I have the direction. If general consensus, anybody, I think a good way to say this is anybody not on board with that.
And we also wanted the visual restriction as well, right?
Yes, it would follow the same restrictions, but like you're saying, say there's a circle in the middle, of atrium or something, I think is kind of what you're saying, but I'll work on the technical language, but I have the direction.
Paragraph 070.
Do we need that? Was that covered under other lighting provisions already in? We talk about the applicable city lighting standards. Is that sufficient? Do we really need this section?
Mm,
My sense is that some of this may be for security purposes.
Yeah.
And the Chief Dicer would like to be able to see if there's people coming in and out late to a facility that could store these products.
well, I think the key word in this whole section is the downward facing security lights. To me, this whole section is basically for the security and safety of the people participating in the experience and for security reasons. So I don't have any problems with this.
If
I don't have
we-
a problem with that. I just didn't know if it was redundant.
If we're gonna leave it in, I would suggest we delete for facilitators, participants, and employees. Vendors, postmen, other people ought to be able to take advantage of a light.
I'm sorry.
Or the casual passer.
Yeah.
Yes, if you are not one of those.
The light that turns off if a vendor. can-
We have really advanced security lights that you have to show your.
Do you agree? It doesn't add a lot to the sentence.
I understand what you're saying.
Sanitation.
I'll take that into consideration to make sure, yes, I'll think
You
about
just-
that
just
more.
Delete for facilitators, participants, and employees.
Sure.
Do we want to, in an effort to reduce light pollution, is there a time frame? Hour after closing? Do we want them on all night long?
Mhm.
And so when you think about that too, you want to think about the businesses are not only just the healing centers, they're also say, for example, somebody starts a cultivation, testing, whatever facility where they're actually growing. So it may just kind of,
I was
do you have
gonna
any input
say, I
on
know
that?
A lot of
with regard to the
buildings
rest
are
of the-
designed with exterior lighting and security lighting that stays on after the actual exterior lighting goes out.
Why, do we need to add anything to the existing lighting ordinances for just this business? I don't think, seems like our existing lighting ordinance should apply.
Our existing lighting ordinance does not mandate lights for certain business.
Yeah.
So in some senses, that's what this is doing, that we're saying to enhance security. We want a certain level of lighting on the outside of this building at all times. So
Okay,
I think
that's,
we may get some pushback if we take out lighting.
that's fine. What she said makes sense to me, that you want it lit because it's got a security risk associated with it.
Yeah, and like I said, it doesn't necessarily mean every light in the lot needs to be on. You know, a lot of businesses will leave certain lights on as security lighting, which is enough for PD or whoever to see inside the building or see around the exterior of the building and not, have every light on the premise on.
Karen, you got something to say?
for the exterior lighting, there is some language that we use for lighting in general that I think I'd like to carry over. And I would have to look at it, but it's basically, and you started here, but it's the full cutoff downward directional.
You get the
And,
Kelvin
It's
temperature.
not-
lights.
Yeah.
In our code, but it's typically a condition of approval is, limited to 2,700 Kelvin for the light temperature.
Sure.
Because it really does make a difference when you look at a building, something that's got that nice, warm, soft glow versus you can land an aircraft with that color spectrum. bulb.
Yeah, we're trying to air traffic control with it. No, if you all are in consensus with that, I think that would be helpful to pull from other areas of the code for consistency.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. 080.
A typo in your title.
Based on the work session the city council had, and the testimony,
Businesses.
it seems like it'd be prudent to require not only is the medicine located within a permanent building, but it's also secured within a safe or a lockbox somewhere that if you got into the building, you wouldn't have easy access.
As it's written, I think the existing sentence doesn't really focus on what anyone's talking about. It says, all storage for natural medicine business shall be located within a permanent building, may not be located at trip. All storage, does this include the rakes and shovels for maintaining the grass? It says all storage, it doesn't say, it doesn't define what,
Of the product.
it doesn't say that, I think it's meant is
Storage of.
storage of the
natural-
product.
Yeah. Of.
So once you get to that point, then the next product, which comment was just made, the issue was a lockbox safe, some kind of should be some kind of security.
And I think they also
But
said during the work
But
session
for the
that
natural
this-
medicine products, you know, the natural medicine products, natural medicine byproducts, whatever, the whole list.
Natural medicine product is the term in the definitions.
and during the work session with the city, they said that, I believe they said it was the state regulation that it has to be secured in a safe.
Is it already provided?
I will check on that, but if it's the state regulation, they have to abide by it. So I will double check that for you.
If it's
Wh-
already
when I'm-
provided,
And
do
if
we
we have to
delete
abide
this
by it,
or
we
do
don't
we
have to repeat it.
duplicate?
I think,
If you can find, if it's roughly the same, if you can find a similar sentence that copies the state, when do that, that way we're not, doesn't look like we're taking away the requirement, but the people reading the ordinance will see it.
sure. That makes sense to me. General consensus on that?
Yeah.
Understood. Yes, yeah, if there's a way I can expand on that, that mirrors a state regulation or CRS, then to try to regulate, make sure it appears merit limiting. Thank you.
But when you read the rest of this provision, it's important to be located within a permanent building in a secure, safe lockbox. It may not be located within a trailer, tent, or motor vehicle. And that makes sense.
Oh, 90?
Just a question. I'm not familiar with the product, but does it have a
Yeah.
distinct smell?
Is it
Maybe the media
objectionable
that it
smell
grows
that's
in?
produced? I mean, I would think
Not to
that'd be
worry
from
about
like
that
maybe
one.
the grow.
I
or
have,
growing.
it would be a growing
Right.
aspect of it, like the
Well, I'm
cold.
not opposed to it.
Yeah, I think
Just-
it's a good thing just to have, dispensation. Their facilitator that I am aware of should not have an odor. However, a natural medicine business would. And this is the way I wish the state had done it separately, if they had separated out. And I'm sure it's because of licensing purposes, but they had said natural medicine healing centers, natural medicine business. It would have been different, but I didn't write it. And I also think there's an opportunity for healing centers and businesses to actually operate together contemporaneously. So I'm doing the best I can to kind of clarify
Okay,
things
thank you.
with the piece laid in my lap of the state legislature language.
I'm more likely here to help you.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Larry, the code does say they have to control access to the product. It doesn't say like what physical controls, but like who can go and sign a log and all that kind of stuff. So there is some provision for limit, keeping
That makes sense.
control of the product.
100?
I don't have any problem with that.
I think
They're-
100's
they're
akin
being-
to a sharps box, if you have needles in a
There being no comment, let's just move on.
I apologize, I didn't.
We can buy one.
I want you to comment. No, please, go ahead if you want. I misheard you and I'm so sorry.
By cutting things off, does somebody have a comment?
That was consensus.
No, that's just me wanting to talk.
We almost had it. We'll try 110.
Yes, thank you.
Before we get to 110, should we consider additional provisions regarding some kind of responsibility of the center, not for impaired driving?
That's already required by the state level laws and regulations.
And state law provides for like a safe driver or?
There's parameters
They,
around that.
they can't
but-
release the patient.
Right,
until
the way it
they-
was
they-
explained during the council work session was that it's kind of like going to the doctor and having a procedure where they put you under, you know, and you have to have a driver to take you home or whatever. They're not gonna release you if you're unsafe to drive. Unless there's somebody to take you home or,
And I don't think Woodland Park's smart enough to figure out how to write the ordinance that would.
well, if you go to the dentist up here and they knock you out to pull a tooth, a lot of times the dentist will say you have somebody to drive you home. So I don't think it's something that we have to throw something into the ordinance about.
Okay. And my other thought would be, I don't know how we legislate this either, is to provide for an establishment or a center to be safe, welcoming, non-threatening environment. Because again, from that work session, they talked about the importance of the patient being comfortable.
And I think that's part of the responsibility of the provider.
Mhm.
You know,
It is.
I don't think they're gonna make it to where a client isn't gonna wanna come in.
I mean, these are very expensive licenses to apply for. I believe there's annual fees. I looked at the chart again. The fees are really released after I did my initial memo. But I think things like that would be they would be very difficult to even define legally. And like you said, I don't think it'd be good for business to not make
Mhm.
that sort of environment.
Mhm.
So I just think it would be difficult to enforce. While I understand the sentiment behind it, legally enforcing that would be very,
Yeah.
it's
You
just
must
too
have a teddy
fluffy.
bear for each client.
Well, and the other piece to think about is, how does, what we're after is, time, place and manner, what impacts properties around it, the community. So, if what's going on inside, you know, whether or not there's a warm rug and cushy chairs, versus, you know, elementary school hard chairs for
Yeah.
seating. Is that really something we should be concerned with? Nobody's talking about what the dentist chair looks like, you know, in terms of when we look at regulations for other kind of businesses. So I think there's a little bit of a line there. But I do appreciate your concern for patient
Yeah,
comfort.
I
So
think
that's a very nice thought, but not necessarily our purview.
Overreach.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's it.
Right, then back to 110.
Sounds like nobody had anything redlined on that section.
I didn't think this would be the one we'd get through, but moving along.
Well, I did have something written down for under paragraph D on the next page. And we talked about the meet all the requirements of all adopted water and sewer regulations formulated by the applicable water and sewer provider. Well, in this case, it's always going to be the city of Woodland Park and or city utilities director.
Yeah, yes and no. Is there, not all commercial districts are sewer, are they? Or there's some that are,
That's another thing when I wrote it that way. So in the future, if things do change, that still encompasses the intent that you've got to follow what the powers that be regulate, but I don't necessarily always want to define specifically who it is. Does that make sense? Did I explain that well?
It does, and there are a couple of places inside city limits that are not served by the central wastewater collection system.
Okay.
So there are a few places that are still on septics.
Septic.
Yeah.
So I think leaving it broad for, you know, whatever applicable set of regulations, I
Okay.
agree with Betsy that I think it's got us covered.
Gotcha.
120. Nuisance.
Does anybody have anything flagged on that one?
No comments.
Nope.
Thank you.
The table,
So on the table, you had made a comment that was kind of interesting a few minutes ago, Betsy,
Yes.
about the possibility of the healing centers potentially being located at the same place as like a business that you potentially could see them operating together. And yet in the table, they're proposed as very distinct and separate. So is that something where the natural medicine healing center should also have a P under that heavy service commercial light industrial zone?
Yes. I understand what you're saying. Yes,
Hmm.
we should expand. Yes, if we're only going to permit a cultivation or manufacturing, I'm just summarizing entity to occur in heavy
HSCLI.
HSCLI, then we shall also allow a natural medicine facility to operate in that building if they want to combine. Yes, thank you. That's a very good catch. I appreciate that.
So
If-
we're suggesting in that table then adding a P for natural medicine healing centers under that HSCLI district.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
Yes.
I don't have an issue with that.
maybe, remember, we don't have a whole lot of zones
I was gonna say,
for HSCLI. We don't have a whole lot of space at all.
Mm-mm.
And this general public usage and benefit for the city. I'm not sure we want to have create this business, which is by the nature of it, all the other zones we're talking about are more like medical clinics, you know, local offices, a lawyer's office, a doctor's office, dentist office. Those are things that are, now we're saying this facility can use up some of our limited light industrial space.
But flip that,
That's,
flip that same coin over as the rules written here. If you wanted to have the healing center and then have the business like where you grow and process, you would have to have two separate buildings and two separate zoning, two separate lots.
uh-huh.
So all we're proposing.
but I
here
understand your point.
is to
So could you
allow
make it a
them to
conditional
combine.
use for the heavy service commercial? And that condition would be that it's also a producer.
Condition, implicit in conditional use is would be a finding that it's in the best interest of the city to allow that conditional use.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna put it there, I would make it a conditional only. There's plenty of zones that provided for these facilities between neighborhood commercial, community commercial, service commercial. There's lots of spaces for that.
But where you gonna grow it? Now you
One-
have, no,
Well, that's assumed that every natural medicine healing center operator is gonna produce his own
not
product.
every- No, but if you wanted to, you, under this,
then
you
ask them
have
to-
to have two separate.
Then ask them
facilities.
and come in and make it conditional, just because the zones we have are fairly limited. I hate to see it used with a medical type, type use that could have been done elsewhere in the city.
The one thing I will say that I
Still
recall.
could be,
Could be.
still could be. We're not restricting it. Yeah, go ahead.
No, totally fine. The one thing I do recall from the work session is that something that the practitioner, I'm gonna say practitioners, eventually facilitators, were saying is we really don't want people to push us out into the industrial districts. We would like to kind of be treated as medical. So we've already allowed, it's already been recommended to allow the dispensation and facilitation to occur in a business-like setting. So we're not just sending people out to the
And I-
industrial areas.
I do remember them saying that too.
And so I don't even think the
not-
chances it would happen.
But that's
would
not what we're saying here. We're just saying,
often-
if the business wanted to do that.
Yeah,
That's,
they
their
could,
cho-
yeah.
we're saying whether or not they would be allowed to do that.
And if that's the case, then I'm leaning more toward making it a conditional use than a permitted use.
The issue would be, is that really, would that create an additional undue burden on staff or overload? It might, me thinking out loud, but would that create additional steps that aren't necessarily necessary, not to be redundant, but.
Yeah, I don't know that the conditional use permit process wouldn't add anything.
No.
Other than public hearings and comment and
Yeah.
I don't know that that adds anything. Because you've seen us as we've worked, over the past year or two on the code, making sure we had very clear supplementary use standards. So this use meets these standards, it should be a permitted use, if you're able to comply
That's
with
true.
this. So I think we need to carry that forward here. And maybe it is a case, I mean, and this is one of those things since it's new. And
So-
this is where let me finish. This is where we're starting. Perhaps we go with what Betsy's original recommendation was. And a year or two from now, if something rises to the top and says, hey, we really need to modify the code so that we can, administer the medicine at the same place where we're growing it. So let's look at a code change at that point. So for a place to start, maybe we go with what Betsy had in this document. So Ken, I'm sorry, you had something?
Well, I was just gonna say, instead of calling it natural medicine businesses other than natural medicine healing centers, you could say natural medicine businesses and that are producers that may include a natural medicine healing center.
I think the awkward language.
I mean-
Code.
Well, I disagree with the premise here, because we're now creating the preferred location for this business for administration center becomes the light industrial zone, because there you can also you can also grow the mushrooms. Becomes, so we're maybe not somebody could use another area, but this makes it the preferred location for the place to do the administration, because you can, in the other room, you can process the product.
Oh, I see.
But that's also assuming that the people who produce the product want to also get a facilitator license, which are two different licenses, two different costs, two different educational requirements. I mean, to be.
No,
a
it may or may not be, but in any event, I guess I said, I would be against something that would encourage uses, this kind of office type use in the light industrial areas.
So
I'm
staff
fine leaving it like it is.
Yes, staff suggestion at this point is to leave it as originally proposed by Betsy, because I think it does take, this actually reflects all of the concerns we've been talking about, that industrial uses, land in industrial zones, things that are not industrial uses, and the patient experience needs to not be in an industrial zone. So I think that even though you might think that they go hand in hand, or potentially could, but for our purposes, getting started in Woodland Park, what we've got proposed in this table is probably the best place for us to start.
I second that motion.
I don't think I'm allowed to make motions, but thank you.
So natural healing centers would be allowed only in the 3 districts.
Neighborhood commercial, community commercial, and service commercial. And then the natural medicine businesses, other than healing centers, that's only permitted in that heavy service commercial light industrial zone.
Understand.
Everybody's
I
good?
can agree with that. Yes.
Okay.
All right, thank you all.
The others are more generic provisions. Questions, comments? Section 4, 5, and 6.
No comments.
Checked all my boxes.
All right. Thank you guys very much for your attention to that topic.
General closing comments you really want to make, or should we move on to, or finish this work session, move on?
Just a question for staff. Has anybody approached staff with interest in pursuing this?
Not at a staff level, from that work session, There's a gentleman who seems to have a strong interest in running this type of a business. In fact, he was here for a little bit this evening. You might recognize him from that work session tape. So I would fully expect to see him at our public hearing to add whatever he may want to about the ordinance that comes forward for that hearing. But I've not, unlike back in the day with medical marijuana where my phone was ringing off the hook, it is not like that at all.
And I can also tell you from attending, I attended several virtual presentations, Cedar and then one Dora came in and spoke as well. They, at that point in time, several months ago, but they gave kind of a general, quite frankly, most of this is being licensed or people are seeking licensure more in the front range, more in the Denver metro area. Now, like you said, there is somebody who wants to try to help, particularly the veteran population around this area, but I don't think there's any thought that there's going to be an onslaught or a mad rush, although I don't think that's what you're saying, but I think it's that answers your question. I'm not sure, but I hope it
Yes.
does.
Larry, there's a whole section in the code on physical security.
Oh, okay. So, Mr. Chairman, do we have members of the public sitting out here for our work session? Do we want to?
I'm not sure we want to get in and start public comment here. We don't usually do those for works.
Yeah, public comment wasn't noticed.
Okay.
The next topic is review and discussion of draft regulation concerning water availability for future development and expansion of uses and impact. So basically, that sounds less like you and more like Karen.
It is. I am generally aware, but yes, this in particular.
Well, and I'm not the driving force behind this, but it certainly addresses concerns that you all have consistently brought up here when you're hearing a public hearing item, a quasi judicial item. And then as we've been working through updating our particular code. So what you have in front of you is a draft ordinance that would amend both Title 17, which relates to subdivisions, and Title 18, which relates to zoning here in the city of Woodland Park. And this is this is meant to clearly identify a criteria of making sure that there is adequate water for future development or expansion of uses and any impacts proposed by a use. So this actually came about through the request of several council members through the city manager, who then said to the city attorney, hey, put something together for us. The Utility Advisory Committee has had opportunity to look through this and said that, yes, we're good, we're comfortable with this. Let's get this in place. Let's get moving on this. Water is very important to us, and we need to get this taken care of. And so in the draft that was brought to you, you may notice that site plan, conditional use permit, and special use permit didn't have any modifications or additions. And that's because there is currently language in each of those sections, and it's the same language in each of those three sections. So the city attorney was saying that she felt that was covered. And I put in my memo, that language says, the proposed development shall be designed, constructed, and maintained with adequate water supply, wastewater disposal, solid waste disposal, air quality protection methods, and surface water drainage. So that's why those sections don't appear in that regulation. And in my cover memo, I gave you very clear references, so you make it easy for you to go back and check my work. So in the ordinance, though, there are other things that are added. So there's approval requirements that were added to the subdivision general provisions, the section related to the preliminary plat, related to the subdivision final plat. There's the next section talks about zone changes and conditional use permits, which increase density. Interestingly, that particular code section is not titled well and really came about because of code language related to park capital fees. So it's like an awkward place to put some of that, but there's additional language that was added in that section. Then we did additions to the planned unit development zone district. And then also related for both, just the general requirements of approval for a PUD and the preliminary development plan for the PUD. And then plan changes for a PUD. So there's a couple places within PUDs, where the language was added. And then the next place where it's added is in, the zoning chapter related to when somebody wants to actually change a zoning designation, or, get a zoning development permit. So that would be a prime place when, you've got a new use that comes in, they've changed the use of a property, that, and I don't have the use table in front of me, but we went from, I'm just trying to think of something lower water usage, to a higher water use, and both uses are allowed in that same zone district, that change of use is potentially subject to that water availability clause. So that's what you have in front of you. And I know Commissioner Larson put together a couple of notes and had some specific things that he wanted to add. And I got copies of that for everyone, if that will make this a little easier to follow. I got extras. You copy them? Okay.
Thank you.
I made copies too.
So will we, in this discussion, sort of visit how water use is calculated and estimated in Woodland Park? As I remember from the training session, it's essentially done on dwelling unit taps. That would seem to have a significant bearing on how this is applied and measured and.
This particular ordinance does not dive into that level of detail. And I have our utilities director, at least on his calendar, to be present for the public hearing on the ordinance. So this right now just clearly sets up this criteria. So when the application comes in, part of the referral and assessment of the application is, this is a criteria that gets looked at. So we would talk directly to the utilities department, is there water to serve this use at this location? That's what this ordinance sets up, is that clear criteria that box gets checked as part of reviewing and approving an application. It doesn't get into the calculations behind the scenes, how many gallons he's got sitting in a bucket in his office, none of that kind of thing. It's literally just, is this available?
So is it available? Is that basically a calculation of how many taps are available for the lifespan of the city? Or is there a commitment that you're taking 100 taps and so it comes off that list and then somebody else comes in for 100 taps? I mean, is there a commitment of those taps somehow issued to that developer? Is there a fee associated with that? And when does that happen?
I am not able to answer that. I honestly don't track how he does that. I rely on him. So I apologize that I didn't realize that was going to be a direction you guys were going to want to talk about. So for tonight, and we can certainly have that information available at the hearing, but for tonight is this language in this ordinance going to fit that need in terms of, is this sufficient to make sure this is a clear review criteria? That's the burning question. So.
Yeah,
In general terms, I'm agreeable to it.
Yeah, I'm very much in favor of the intent. I do have some questions on the specific language. And so you kind of mentioned it sufficiently clear. Several places talks about detailed, verifiable, and authenticated documentation of the availability of water. A little vague in my mind what constitutes details, what constitutes verifiable, and what constitutes authenticated, to include by whom. So, like I said, I love the intent. I'm a little unclear on the with this language, what that means in terms of actual implementation.
So these revisions were drafted, specifically by Nina, who, as you know, has a lot of land use background.
Okay.
And so not having drafted it, however, having worked with her, and I know you all are familiar with it as well, if she believes that language is sufficiently defining for what we're trying to accomplish, I would defer to her judgment on choosing the language she did.
So the section I assume you're talking about, just to get us all in the same spot, in that ordinance, it would be 17.20.080. So midway down page.
It's repeated a few
2.
times, but that's the first.
Okay, that's the first instance of it. So that's a requirement that somebody would need to turn in as part of a preliminary plat application. So so detailed, exactly how many gallons of water are you looking for? Why is it that particular number that you're saying you're going to need for your use? Verifiable. So what is the source of that water? How do we know that that's there? You know, if it's, you know, City of Woodland Park and it's already planned for, you hear Kip talk about that, it's planned for. So some type of statement or verification from the utilities director saying, yes, this is planned for and available. And so then that authenticated documentation. So that's not a note from the developer's mother. It's something from the provider of the water. So I don't know if that helps in terms of like what we would look for at a staff level as part of that application.
Everything you said was reasonable, but I suppose an unreasonable person could come to a different conclusion.
I mean, it makes sense to me because I know there's been projects here in the last couple of months that have been turned down because the city cannot provide adequate water to the building site. And the person who wants to build is requiring more water than can be provided.
So like I said, I'm way cool with the intent, just trying to tack down the corners of what this exactly means to us and to them.
So for whatever that's how I, as a staff person, would look at this and approach this. And it doesn't mean at some point we don't end up with more specifics for the applicant, because there's things that often we hand to an applicant, tools, resources to help them put together a successful application that aren't detailed in the ordinance itself, but it's part of how you help somebody get a solid application through the door.
And I also think as the water scenario evolves, you know, maybe certain things change is what needs to actually, what somebody's required to do to make it detailed enough.
So maybe flip that question over. What criteria might one use to state that something is not sufficiently detailed or is not verifiable or is not authenticated? Maybe that's an inverse way to answer the question.
So sometimes this is one thing, there's a case that, you know, it's like essentially you can't always find everything, so you know it when you see it. And that's like a supreme, and it's not, it's sincerely a literal, it's actually a definition of pornography. But you know, but I think that this is a scenario that would be evolving based upon what's really occurring in the city, what we need and what really kind of fits, what is detailed, verifiable and authenticated at the time. Does that make sense for you all, our application?
Well, authenticated, I'll focus on that word for a second. Strongly implies there's an authority, a recognized authority who has the city given right to say, I authenticate that analysis, that document, whatever. Are we envisioning someone or would that be someone, a licensed engineer, or someone would have to have some credentials in water management, or I'm just struggling here.
And I don't know, because I was not part of any of the UAC meetings or discussions about
Okay,
this, so
right.
I'm a little bit in the dark here.
Okay.
But the analogy that's coming to my mind is like traffic studies. You know, they're detailed, how many trips, what time of day, where is it coming and going, turning movements, those type of things. There's baseline data that's verifiable. you know, that somebody's out there and done traffic counts. And then, you've got, to your point, Don, an engineer or a traffic engineer often prepares those studies.
Okay.
So at some point, are we, whether it's Woodland Park or the state as a whole, potentially at that level of detailed information being required to do development in the state? Quite possibly, since water is, you know, a finite, valuable resource. Are we exactly there at this point in time? I don't know, but I do think this language sets up that framework that then potentially becomes the standard, and we're prepared to go that direction if that's where the states at some
Yeah,
point.
I like the criteria. Would like to see them better, more fully defined. I'm not against the criteria stated, just to me, they're not sufficiently clear.
Well, right now, we ask for people to do a traffic report or a traffic study, but we don't provide details as to what needs to be within that document. So, I guess that's why I'm reasonably comfortable with how this is currently worded.
I mean, 'cause yeah, and the individuals who would be, you know, authenticating whether or not this occurs will presumably be licensed by some authority to determine, you know, perhaps that, I don't know.
The other piece of it, there's several places that repeated that what's provided will be subject to approval and acceptance of the city utility director. Well, first, just a question of drafting. What's approval, what's acceptance? Do they mean something different? What do they mean? And what is the utility director, does it just say, this doesn't look like a problem, it sort of looks okay to me? Is that what he says?
No,
Typically says whether or not it's.
if we're good moving on to that section, I have similar questions on that section too. But if you don't mind, or we've taken out of the hands of the planning department anyways, it's now the city. Well, just, Scott, hold on, Lee, I was just gonna say, did we kind of close discussion on the detailed, verifiable and authenticated?
No,
Okay,
I had the same concerns.
Okay.
I didn't know what that actually meant. And I said, can we specify what that means? What, and I thought it was the
The reason I
same.
mentioned the point, I was going, in part, does the city utility director look at this and say, looks good to me? That means it's authentic, whereas authentications refers to his approval of what was otherwise detailed, verifiable.
Sometimes too, I think, do we really want to regulate and essentially legislate how the city utility director does his job, how they review all the applications and anything, especially given as it moves forward and things evolve?
Just, yeah, I want to make certain that the utility director can do his job too.
Understood.
Is that his responsibility to say it's right or not? His, I presume, like his acceptance and approval suggests headed that.
Did you say the Utilities Advisory Committee already looked at this and approved it? Kip's on that, correct?
He's the staff person tasked to take care of them.
Yeah, and so I think that would mean Kip has already reviewed this and agreed with it, correct? It appears to me it would be if he's at the
Reasonable
UAC. I think that's
Conclusion.
a reasonable conclusion, yeah. I am 99% certain he attends every one of those.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think we just heard the example of a traffic study. You know, we require that. And here we need to come up with a nomenclature for a water study. Water availability study. And we need to talk about what does that mean? What does it include? Or it doesn't have the words detailed, variable, viable, and authentic documentation. We need to have some clear sense of what's being asked for.
oh, you know what we could do? We could say in a form provided by or approved by the utilities director. And then that gives him the ability to draft kind of like what you were saying, a packet that you provide people. And that lets the applicant succeed in providing the city what it needs, and we leave it to him.
But providing it in the form that we specify isn't get the fully there. That helps get what it looks like, but it doesn't say it's okay. Correct.
I just think, how far do we want to go and telling the utility director to do his job. And I think that if we allow the utilities department to read this and then figure out the best way to enforce it or approve things under it, to me appears to be appropriate.
So,
Leeway is probably not the word, but
so in this case, this is a letter intended to address the city council and planning commission, so we are the first ones to decide if what is submitted is detailed, verifiable, and authenticated. So that's gonna be us.
It's actually staff. It's
Well,
not-
you will read it first and make a recommendation, but it'll be a us to, city council ultimately to decide, but us to.
Well, not everything comes to the planning commission because it's just not a zoning issue. So
Yeah.
everything will go to the utility director to get a water check and go to the staff then. But not everything comes to the planning commission. Unless there's a zoning issue involved.
Yeah, fair enough.
So, but this is not just what comes to the planning commission. This is everything that gets a project submitted, correct?
Yes, this is more comprehensive,
Yeah.
because there are things that are reviewed administratively, just at a staff level that do not require a public hearing with planning commission and or city council. So this puts that criteria clearly in there to make sure that it's part of what gets reviewed in the review process.
And Don, my comment was, let's have a specific study, a name of a study, water availability study, which would include detailed BioPro and the Finnick documentation. Something physical.
You know, I was looking up traffic study to see if that's a good example of something like that. Perfect impact study.
And Betsy, that's what I was looking for when I was agreeing with Don. That's what I'm looking for. I'm just looking for some kind of study that will require. And
Yeah.
it could be including, but not limited to, and go from there.
so I think if there's a general consensus on that, see if you all think this is an approach that is workable. I can speak to Nina about that, and we can also talk to Kip about that. He's the man. He's the person.
Gonna be first one reading it, yeah.
Yeah, and so we can say, do you think this is sufficient for you to do your job, or do you think we should be more finite? And maybe perhaps does that help satisfy what you are thinking? Allows us to work in collaboration with the individual who'll be using.
But at the end of the day, come up with a name.
Is that the general consensus?
Yeah.
Anybody have a thumbs down? That's probably the best way to do this. Okay.
All right, so Lee, now to your question.
We go section by section, discuss it. Now that we've,
Oh, cause you.
Excuse me. And I apologize. Can we have like a 5-minute comfort break before we really dive into this?
it can be better, or is 5 good?
Let's go for 10. Because let's stretch legs, because we might need a few minutes. So that would be
Fine.
desirable, please.
10-minute recess.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, we're back from the recess.
Thank you.
I was, so tell me if it's not useful to initiate the discussion, but it's not clear to me what is the detailed engineering assessment that needs to be done to produce this water study. At any given time, there's a certain amount of water left that the city is not presently using. Anybody who comes in with a new development, they'll have to, there's an engineering question, how much water will that development use? But whoever's in here next, whoever's there next is the one who gets the next allocation of water up until there's no more available.
Okay, I can actually help with this.
Okay, good.
I can help with this a lot. To get to the ordinance that you gentlemen are talking about, where you've got the studies behind it, the math, the details, you plug this in, it takes this much away, this is left, that kind of very linear math kind of an ordinance does require a whole bunch of other baseline kind of background studies, consultants, those kind of things. That takes time and money, emphasis on time. Right now, and you gentlemen know this better than I do, from every time you review something, you feel like you don't have the criteria you want to even talk about this at this level. In terms of, do they have water? Is it clear that we have water to support this use? So while we don't have the math behind it, this ordinance is meant to kind of bridge that gap during this period before we get to that level of ordinance. So that I do see forthcoming, but it's gonna be a while. So in the meantime, do you want to still have this exposure, or do you want to take this opportunity to at least have a criteria in there that focuses the conversation on this topic? So that's really what this is doing, is it sets up that concentrated, focused discussion. And yes, it talks about detailed, verifiable, authenticated documentation. Other ways you see that in our current standards that we've been going through for submittal requirements, provide a statement of, is what it is, as opposed to that whole other level of study behind it. Because I do worry a little bit at the moment, that if we were saying, oh no, we need a whole detailed study with regard to whatever this is, the pushback you're potentially going to hear from the developers is, that's expensive, you're killing my project, I can't possibly do that. Doesn't mean we don't get there at some point, but like I said, we don't have the other background information in place yet. So this bridges that gap. So that's what you have in front of you, is an ability to bridge that gap. So that's kind of what's in front of you tonight in terms of, does this language get you there, even at least at that initial kind of level? I would expect different ordinances at some point in the future, but it's going to be a while. So I don't know if that helps kind of focus where to go next or not.
I actually can confirm what Karen said. I do know that is, when I spoke to Nina kind of about part of this behind it, it's exactly that. It's to just make sure we have something in place till we get everything else followed up.
It does help in understanding that this isn't anticipated to be the be all and end all of the.
No, this is the starting point.
Well,
So, and I apologize, I didn't express that
Yeah.
clearer sooner, so.
Karen, can I
I
ask you a
just-
question?
Sure.
On some of the zoning questions that have come up before us, we've had core weigh in, we've had the traffic study, we've had those same things. This is just to basically say, we want to see and have it part of the thing, a water assessment by KIP or the utilities director, right? It just says, here's my position on the water, and we see that as part of the package, kind of like the other utilities? Or is-
Yes, and we do refer to him now. But it at least puts the burden on the applicant as, hey, you got to bring to us,
That you've checked and
at
got
least
information.
at least give us some type of parameter in terms of what you're looking at. Like I said, it's a place to start. So.
And I think we're, not to disagree, but I think we're a little closer to that end state than maybe it was portrayed, because, KIP does those long-term water usage studies. Looks at the total number of taps, if everything's fully developed based on our current zoning and everything. So we do have a baseline. It's not easy to do. He doesn't refresh it every 10 minutes. But so when we see a new application come in, we can assess it versus that baseline. So we do have a grounds to make a reasonable assessment.
Right now, most of that tap allocation discussion happens at the residential level, if I remember correctly. What's not been vetted in that level of detail has been commercial uses. And I think in KIP says that the belief is that the one supports the other, and I can't
Right.
remember which way it goes. So to get to that level of detail around commercial, we're not there yet. That's the missing pieces. So the tap allocations really all go back to residential dwelling units. So again, this is part of just starting to bridge that gap in the interim.
I suggest we go ahead and go through the line by line, Ken.
Okay. Seventeen oh 4.050.
So let's go through some whereas. The six, the last whereas on the first page,
In order to protect integrity?
correct?
Okay,
I think we need to insert, when we talk about ensure sufficient adequate water supply to service the needs of future developments and expansions and use and impact within the city. We need to also include existing and future residences and businesses.
and where are you putting that in there?
To serve the needs of future developments, expansions, existing and future residents and businesses. That gets really to the crux, of what you were just saying. Yeah. And as we get to the section by section, I made a note, mention this too, that we are dealing with the existing code as it sits here today.
Correct,
And we have gone through many of these sections already
correct.
through our review. And that we need to trust staff to take the comments that come out of this ordinance, however it's approved. And then kind of reassess that, how we've reviewed it for our purposes for the
Yeah.
update, code update.
Yeah, in talking with Jen at Logan Simpson, she's aware that these are in play and that when it makes it through the end and gets through city council public hearings and there's something that is adopted, that's what I will then send back to her that gets filled into that overall draft. So.
So it's just gonna be a balancing existing, changed, and what we're proposing for the next.
So kind of like the last one, the numbering will be different, but whatever language gets finessed out of this hearing process and where it's intended to be located, we'll get that lined up. And then, of course, will be the draft of the code as a whole also goes through legal review to make sure that that's put in the best place for it.
And we've talked about this with our code update. What we want to do is say, throw out the old, bring in the new. Essentially, we don't want to go.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, there's quite a few things, especially under process where we've really tried to bring
Yes.
in the new.
Yep.
When it was more standards or metrics around specific uses that were already there. Not trying to redo those. It really was processes to where we're making the larger changes right now.
I just think it's important that we all know that, understand it. That's all mine, whereas.
Okay, 050.
So in C, I guess what I want to clarify. And I like the basic flow of it, they have to submit. What are we calling it? I don't know if we're calling it anything, but like basically a water use plan has to be reviewed, accepted by the city utility director. I just don't want it to imply that that's the end of the road for review and approval of that. That's just a necessary step along the road to then review by the commission and then ultimately approved by the council. That they can't say, well, city utility director approved it, so I'm good, I'm done.
Does KIP need to sign off on every single family house? There's a water tap that has to be gotten, and assuming there's a sufficient number available for it, does he there a separate process he's supposed to? give
All
his
the
approval
taps
and
are assigned by the
acceptance?
city council currently.
Pardon?
Hang on, Dave's gonna answer that question. He leaped for the microphone back there.
Yep. So, Kip doesn't necessarily sign off himself on the individual water taps. What he does is, has his technician verify the water fixture unit count. And that's, there's three different tiers for for the water tap fees. So his technician reviews that, so everything gets verified as to what the water fixture unit count is.
Okay, and is that
Okay, and-
subsumed by this, or is that two separate processes we're creating?
They're kind of different processes because this section that you're looking at right now is in Title 17. So this relates to subdivision. And this is some of that general language at the beginning of that section. Because if you
Okay, you got me already there, 17. It's not, you're not gonna put in a single family house on a subdivision.
Okay, there's individual lots for houses, and then there's subdivisions for when you create new lots. And so this is part of creating new
Yeah.
lots.
You answered my question.
Okay. Well, and it's part of it's because of how the code's written, even the one above it, a B, no building shall be erected on any lot, unless there's street access. So it's basically not written the greatest, because the bottom line is you're not wanting to make a lot unless there's street addresses or access, which is what it's probably really supposed to be saying, but that's not what it says. So for the sake of consistency with what's in our current regulations, I believe that's why you see this language added here at this juncture.
Nobody else had question? 80?
Well, so were we comfortable that this makes it clear that city utility director will definitely review, give the good housekeeping seal of approval, but that does not equal the last step in that process?
This sets out approval requirements for the subdivision as a whole, that there's other sections in here that are more where that review criteria shows up, where the utility director is really chiming in at that point. So this is kind of that preliminary part of creating new lots, and says that, you're not going to get a lot unless we've got water to support it. It's more, even though it says approval requirements, it's kind of setting out policy and direction behind the rules. So again, we're working with not great existing language, which makes it very awkward.
Anyone else have any reservations or is everyone comfortable?
I think, Don, if you look at B right above it, it's not being changed. It has very similar language about the requirement of having street access. This is basically saying no lot shall be built upon within the subdivision.
But that says
Unless it-
approved by the city. This says approved by the city utility director, so. I just want to make it clear that the approval authority is the city, not. The city utility director is a very important advisor in that approval process, but he or she alone is not the approval authority for that. That's what I'm trying to make sure that we're clear.
Actually, I'm understanding you now, and that's a really excellent thought, quite honestly. Since this really is relating more to the subdivision plats and the creation of lots, which is under the purview of city council or the city. So maybe that get rid of utility director, because there are other places when you're dealing with a lot and you're wanting to cite a specific use on the lot, that's when we're into that individual lot referral with the utility director. Even as part of creating the subdivision, it gets referred out to the utility department and they provide feedback and comment.
Oh, yeah,
So that's all part of the consideration of the subdivision.
yeah, so just clarify that.
Or we just go ahead and strike the words.
Utility director.
Or their designee.
Yep.
I mean, the intent is to use the utility director to identify that there is sufficient service for the intended use and structures of such lots. not to approve or, yeah, so,
Okay, I think we got that.
okay.
80,
We beat this one up pretty good earlier, but,
we did. If you
I just, for now, you guys are willing to go with what's written there for the detailed, verifiable and authenticated documentation of the ability to connect to water sufficient and adequate to service the needs of the proposed lots, uses, or structures.
Yes.
Yeah.
Heads are nodding yes. Okay.
90,
That's the same.
any reason to not move on?
Yeah, and it's essentially that same language, but it's applied directly to major and minor subdivisions. So it's just making sure that that's part of what the developer needs to submit as part of those application packages, but otherwise it's that same set of language.
Kind of going back to 80 and 90. And we talk about detailed, variable and dedicated documentation. I thought and I have written down, add a water availability study, which provides detailed, viable and authentic.
And we did talk about that prior to our comfort break. But part of where we circled back was we don't have some of the other background intel in place to get there at this point. So
If you don't want to use the word water availability study, we need to come up with a name of what we're doing.
well, and that's where, like, other times you see the request for the developer provides a statement regarding blah, 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 blah.
A portion of the letter of intent. So as a paragraph, they should, or page or 3, whatever it takes to explain these, but it's part of the letter of intent.
Okay.
Okay.
Noted in
I
item F.
like that statement.
All right, the next one, 1736-045.
As I started in our intro, this is the language that was actually drafted as part of park capital fees, and you see that in the earlier part of this. But the title of it, it's not the best set of language for what it is, what it's supposed to do. Adding this particular statement regarding water at the end of it, does it, because it's that same language that we've been talking about essentially, does it impact or does it adversely impact what's going on here? No. So I'm at a staff level, I'm okay with it there. Tried to get it plugged in other locations, which is where you see a new section related to zone changes, where you see the requirement for water show up there or a conditional use permit, because that's where you would more logically look for something like that. But like I said, from a staff perspective, I was okay with this being here.
I mean, isn't this meant to apply only when there's going to be increased usage? And the reason I say it says it assumes, which results in increased density. To change the zoning classification or conditional use permit, which results in increased density. Changing conditional use could have a lot more water use, but didn't necessarily change density. Because the conditional uses tend to be the commercial and industrial uses.
But this section, because it really is supposed to pertain to park capital fees, is associated with residential development.
That's for sure. Okay.
No, it's a bigger problem with the whole section, Lee. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, because when you're getting the conditional use permit to develop multifamily housing in a multifamily zone, this is part of what says, hey, you need park capital fees that get paid. This is where we're also saying, is there water for this increased density?
So let me try a set of, maybe looking at the puzzle pieces, maybe let's look at the picture on the front of the box. By that, I mean, so we want to make sure that if there's something that's going to impact water usage in a material way, that we get a bite at the apple, we get review. So zoning changes covered, right? Changes in use within an existing approved zone, that's what this is covering. that that,
This is change, this really, I think, goes more towards that density and a conditional use. This is why you see it sprinkled in a couple of locations, that there's, I think, a different section that gets at what you're talking about better.
so I'm just trying to see, do we have the waterfront, pun intended, covered? Are we getting a opportunity to review when and where needed and not more often than needed? So that's my big general question, and then I think that'll answer a lot of the little questions.
I think, not by this section alone, but
Right.
through the whole thing, we are getting to the point of making sure that water is a conversation on any application. Cause like the next section is a new section specific to zone change or modification. So that's when you're changing the district from like suburban residential to
Yeah.
multifamily urban. So that's where that and it's, because it's not in addition to a paragraph, it's not underlined in there, but that's where that new section comes in. Does that help when you start to look at more pieces in the puzzle?
Yeah, that's all the conversation I was trying to get, so we feel comfortable that we've got the checks and balances in the right places where we need them.
Yeah, and then the next, I think 3 sections deal with planned unit developments, because within that existing language for PUDs, there's a couple different places where we probably should be talking about water. You know, the first is with that preliminary development plan, or what we're now going to call a concept plan. And then there's also plan changes. And then it was also even before that in terms of the review requirements when looking at or considering a PUD. So that's what this next section shows, that it's that same language showing up in a couple of places. So if I'm looking at establishing a PUD, what are the review criteria that need to be considered? And then specifically at that preliminary development plan, you know, make sure that we're talking about water. And then again, if I've got a approved plan, but I now want to change it, you know, water is part of the conversation again to modify a PUD plan.
Larry, did you have any lingering concerns that maybe we kind of missed a piece
No,
part in all that, or you feel comfortable?
I'm comfortable.
So that actually goes through section 030, 040,
140,
140.
those are all this PUD.
And then this last section is more like one of your questions earlier about, I've got a house I want to build, you know, is there water for this? So this is that level of building permit, or what the zoning development permit related to water availability. And, you know, it's one thing to talk about it when you create the lot, but there's another when you've got water gets tighter, who knows what happens, but you've got a lot that's out there and you're now at a zoning development permit level. It's like, is there water at this to serve this lot, this use at this location, whether it's a single family home or a restaurant that's going in, you know, through a site plan review process. That's part of what gets looked at here. Because like I said, there were other things that are not in this ordinance because there's already language in there, and one of those was site plan. So it's just a way of reinforcing the topic through a couple different places in the regs.
So I'm gonna ask something that's, so I realize beyond the scope of this, what we're considering here today, but kind of curious what the future holds, or what people in people's heads determine when we get to the point where, hey, it's getting scarcer and scarcer, we're getting closer to the, you know, someone's gonna hear a no. How that, is it just yes until we run out and then it's no? Or do we envision, hey, you know, you're zoned for that. You know, you should have 14 taps allocated based on that zoning, so we're gonna hold that. You know, I'm just curious. I know there's not today,
Yeah.
Pat answered that question.
Well, no, from having heard Kip talk on several occasions, and you probably heard him say this too, he'll tell you the city is always looking to acquire and develop water resources. So the goal is to never get to that point where you're saying, no, nothing else ever builds here. But it's a very long lead time to get water resources allocated, perfected, and available for municipal use. So in the meantime, let's make sure we're talking about and using our water the way we want to when development comes through the door. So these are the tools in our regulations that facilitate that conversation.
By the way, that was a nice discussion in presenting this in the future for other sessions. You might have say exactly that.
Oh yeah, I got that memorized. I'm glad we're recording it. So thank you for that feedback.
You know, water is not entitled to a developer or landowner until they apply for a water tap permit. At that point, that's when it's guaranteed that you can have that water for that project. Up until that time, they use the word allocated. And right now, we have more water allocated than we have water available. Unless, like Karen just said, unless we buy more water. And I don't have a rosy picture of this community being able to purchase future water,
Yeah.
water in the future.
I remember a lot in Kip's thing about secondary rights, and Woodland Park has very few primary, if any.
Part of the plan that we put together was very specific about we need to try to begin to think about this. We just don't have somebody waiting in line at the utility office and say, you get your permit, next person comes in. No, you
That was
don't,
the
because
last
we
one.
just ran out. We need to plan for that. And we need to have, and the plan is very carefully worded to say water availability awareness plan. So that we are aware of this, and we need to plan for that to happen. I don't think the city of Woodland Park can compete with the Colorado Springs, Pueblos of the world. The water is too expensive.
Well, it's not even money,
scarce.
it's rights, and
No.
they're not gonna surrender their rights if they need the water.
So, you know, the next step, I mean, this just recognizes that at this particular moment in time, we have that water available. In the future, we've got a plan for when we can have it. You agree with that?
Yes, the goal is to definitely keep developing water, acquiring what we can. To your point, we are in incredibly stiff competition for the available resources. And I've been a planner in the state of Colorado most of my career. I had a couple of forays out of state because, well, who doesn't want to see what the neighbors are doing, right? But one of my early positions was with Lake County, which is Leadville. So the headwater of the Arkansas River. And that would have been the late 90s when I was up there. And there were a number of ranches that went on the market for sale during that 2.5 years I was up there. I talked to water scouts all over this state, primarily Front Range, Denver, Aurora, Pueblo, Colorado Springs, the big four, all talked to me in my office about these ranches. I'm taking the water. How do I get rid of the land? And that was how many years ago? Several decades at this point. And that was when water was more affordable. You know, and at the headwaters, you're talking like primary rights. So yeah, very, very desirable. So it's, I said this to somebody here recently or within the past year, that at this point, at this location on the river, here in Woodland Park, if you're now wanting to talk about water, you're easily 50 years behind the curve, easily 50, in terms of when those conversations should have happened. In some ways, I was very blessed when I worked out on the Eastern Plains, that it's a small ag community that I worked for. And so they were all farmers. So the folks that served on city council in that community, back in the 50s, they were like, water is our future. We're securing our water. So that little community actually has really solid water resources because of the vision of that council back in the 50s. So we're just in a different situation. It doesn't mean we're doomed by any stretch of the imagination. It means that we've got bigger challenges as we go forward. And so the first step really is this ordinance in terms of how do we ensure this is part of the conversation and continue to develop our stewardship towards the water resource. And know that we want to see that other ordinance developed. Let's do those studies. Let's get in place the tools that we need to, so we can be even more accurate and diligent about this resource. But for now, this gets that started for us.
Okay. We have 3 new paragraphs covering handout.
Oh, I want to make sure that, go back to section 6.
On page 3,
Page 3. We have the approval and acceptance of the city, and cross off the words utility director or their designee.
that makes sense, and zone changes are ultimately approved by city council.
Same thing with section 7 below that. Approval and acceptance of the city, cross off utility director or designee.
In section 9 and 10 as well.
What did you say, Don? I didn't quite hear you.
Oh, it's in section 9 and 10 as well.
Yep.
Counting on you to catch it if if it's one of those quirks where it's not the city council that approves it, it's us or someone else.
We do have most of the early ones are approval and acceptance of the city utility director, which we were crossing out. They're not all though. Let's see. One in section 9 is the approval of the city, not approval and acceptance. And the new paragraphs are all just approval, not approval and acceptance.
And that's exactly what I wanted to get to next.
So I earlier asked, what's the difference between approval and acceptance? Is either one of them good enough or are they something different?
Well,
Approval sounds like what we need.
So I would say as written, it's probably okay, but I can go back over and think about whether or not we need to say approval and or acceptance. Is that essentially what you're saying?
Well, first thing is they should be the same all the way through.
Yes.
And, yeah, and make an assessment of which is which, but I think approval is what we probably need.
Well, and it was pointed out earlier, like in the paragraph right above it. For street access, approved by the city. So. I think just use the same, I would recommend just use that same verbiage.
Yeah.
Approved by the city.
In the new sections, should it go 10 to 11 or shouldn't they follow kind of a chronological order or numbering order? So this new section 11, 18.34.070 should probably come in before the existing section 10, slot them in. So
I'm sorry, I gotta make sure I'm on the right page, spot on the page,
Well,
but
say-
where are you, sir?
say
Larry's
number 1
additions.
through 10, right,
Larry's
from
comments?
earlier reference in 17 and then 18. I'm saying the new section 11 comes
Okay.
before the existing section 10.
So-
Just slot them in order.
Oh, in terms of how
Yeah.
you integrate
Yeah.
Larry's suggestions?
Slightly
Okay,
different.
yeah, that's easy enough. to
Yeah,
do.
we'll fix the numbering to make sure.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, a new section 11 will effectively become 10, 11, 12, and then 10 will become 13 or 14, whatever. But yes,
Right.
I understand.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're on the same page here. Gotcha.
There's an acceptance in section 10 right now. And we
Yeah.
approve. Approval of.
maybe do a search on that term when you.
Yep.
Figure out how it should be worded.
Yep.
Okay,
I'll do that consistency throughout for sure.
Other items?
Everybody okay with these proposals that I made to add those standards?
yeah, so Larry's sheet, we talked about that site plan review, conditional use permits and special use permits. There's already that language in all three of those that talks broadly about water, wastewater, other utilities and such. So what Larry is suggesting here is adding a criteria to that list that is specific to the availability and sufficiency of water for the use. So he's actually in some ways peeling it out of that other one and making it a standalone item. So that's what this extra sheet is that he's presented this evening.
It just offers extra strength.
And the same, city utility director or
Yep.
designee.
Yep.
Should be deleted.
Yes, I'll make the city utility director designee. I'll do the same thing as in the other sections, correct? Thank you, everybody.
Do note that conditional use permit and special use permits are subject to public hearing. So, and both are ultimately approved by city council. Just a site plan, it can be associated with either one of those other two hearing items, or it's potentially a review just at a staff level. So in that case, because there's other things that we've been doing where the planning director is the approval entity, a planning director or designee. So with the site plan, it is potentially the city utility director or designee that needs to fill in there, because it's not, a site plan by itself isn't gonna go through a public hearing process.
So do you think it would be appropriate if our office worked to make sure that that is sufficiently encompassed in the verbiage?
If city covers it all, I'm good with that.
I
That
think
just-
city would, and if, when I can think, I have a moment to think back on the actual verbiage there, say it needs to be city and or authorized designee, something like that, instead of perhaps identifying the particular individual today, if it's encompassing. If that reflects your direction, then I can wordsmith the correct word.
Yeah. Fortunately, we're modifying the old version. The newer version, we try to create some tables with who approves what and be delegated, and then you just go to the table.
Exactly, and at least for now, though, we're getting the intent, which is making sure, like, get your water, so that's the best we can do, I think, for now, and I think this should hopefully accomplish that goal, especially with your all's input and the additional things.
Mhm.
I would hope, I would think it would be very arguably and supportably clear.
There's one of the things in the revised code that we've been working on. There's a section that calls out the different review bodies. So it gives background on like planning commission, what they're tasked with, board of adjustment, those kind of things, but it also includes planning director. There's another little short section related to city engineer. So it may be advisable that we add something related to utility director, if that proves to be a check term that needs to be added. So,
Yeah.
And our office will work, I think, with planning to make sure that we're kind of covering that in an appropriate way.
and I'm meeting with Jen tomorrow.
For the verbiage, I mean.
That I can ask her to put a placeholder in there at the moment to help us remember that.
Cool.
and whether or not it makes the cut and we need it, you know, and it may get deleted, but at least it helps, helps keep the eye on the ball.
If that's general consensus okay with you all, I think that's a great way for us to move forward from my drafting standpoint.
Yes.
It's the same
Yeah.
thing with the table that was included in here for the uses on the previous discussion.
Mhm.
You kind of mix the whole thing with plan conditionally. I mean, that's what we're shooting for eventually. Right now, it says that.
Okay.
And that gets us to the end of this ordinance.
Okay, well, only if you give us your reports.
Only if I give you your reports.
Is that all right? Everybody okay?
Yep.
I have one thing to report. Council is singular. That was a question you had from last meeting.
Oh. Okay,
You say the
well,
council.
it's, yeah,
they,
we
they-
use the American approach, not the British approach.
So,
At this point, I guess the only thing to really report at your March 13th meeting, you actually do have 3 public hearing items. One is an extension or requested extension of an application that was, it's a preliminary plat extension. And then we have these hearings on these 2 ordinances scheduled for that evening. So that's what's there. And then the second meeting in March right now is shaking out to be another work session on that larger code review project. That's all I got at the moment.
I won't be here every time, but I appreciated being here tonight and working with you all and, look forward to seeing you around and coming back in and out. So
thank you.
see you all on an as needed basis.
So that's it.
Okay, there being nothing else? Meeting adjourned.